people. Finally finished this book, Detroit 67. It's written by a Scottish guy. He's like some kind of professor of music or something. If you look at the cover, you see a soldier. He looks like he's fairly well frightened. Got a bayonet on his rifle. Detroit 67. I mean, what do you instantly think of? You think about the riots. But down at the bottom there, it says the year that changed soul. So, most of this book is about Motown and about Diana Ross and Supremes. And it's something that I'm not interested in at all. I really struggled through this book. I don't know, YouTube says that I uploaded one of my book videos like a week ago, but I don't think so. I think it took me 2 weeks to finish this book. So, here's my first note. It was about the second sentence on this page. Yeah, there's just extra words inserted into this sentence, and it's page 26, and it's the second grammatical error that I found. At one point, I thought I was going to keep track of the errors in this because, it's not completely unusual to have some spelling errors, some grammatical errors, extra words stuck into a sentence. Sometimes in a 300-page book, there's maybe 2 errors. This book was just full of them. There's no way that I could have kept track of the errors in this book. It's also got a kind of a funny cover. This is actually a very uncomfortable book just to hold in your hand. There's no way that you can lay in bed and rest this on your leg or anything. I'm complaining about a character. He introduces a character. The guy's name is Jenkins. 2 paragraphs later, the guy's dead. Why even go there? There's hundreds and hundreds of characters that get introduced throughout this book. I've got a note towards the end about character introduction. Here on page 164, I've got a note that says WKNR. Now, I lived through this. I was alive. I don't remember the riots. I was 7 years old. I just barely remember, I think the Tigers won the World Series in '68. I just barely remember that. I was only 8 years old. I didn't give a fuck about the Tigers. I didn't give a fuck about Detroit. I wasn't living in Detroit. I was living in Dearborn. But this WKNR note, I ended up making friends with a kid that lived on the Southfield Service Drive. And his father was a disc jockey at WKNR. WKNR's not broadcasting anymore. I had a bike, and his dad gave me WKNR bumper stickers, and I just covered my bike with those WKNR bumper stickers. Second paragraph. Oh, the book is not entirely about Motown and the Supremes and all the other acts from Motown. It also follows the MC5. It does have, a good 40 pages about the riot. It talks about crime in Detroit. It talks about what came to be called white flight. It wasn't just white flight. It was the black people moved out of Detroit as well. Things that happened in Detroit. It even talks about the weather of that year. But here is a thing, and it talks about protesting the Vietnam War a lot. I'm sure I would have been doing that at that time. But it talks about this thing that the hippies did. They had some kind of a love-in on Belle Isle. And this is an awful long paragraph I've got to read here, but I'll read a little bit of it. The bandshell on Belle Isle was unexpectedly cordoned off that day, and despite promises made to the organizers, it had been rendered out of bounds. Temporary staging was unavailable, and up to 20 local rock bands improvised solutions all day. MC5, Billy C. and the Shells, and Seventh Seal pirated power wherever they could and set up banks of speakers in raised clearings around the park. Crowds flocked around the bands in huddles, and hundreds climbed trees throughout the parks to get a better vantage point. For the first 3 hours, hippie security force, the Psychedelic Rangers, under the command of an untrained student named Brian Collins, managed to contain the boisterous but largely peaceful crowd. Unfortunately for the city's battered reputation, a few sporadic incidents before dusk led to chaos. Members of the Outlaws, some wearing chains and Nazi memorabilia, sprayed beard on the crowd and chanted Sieg Heil at the hippies. The Outlaws drove their bikes threateningly at a crowd of acid rock fans, scattering them. Police moved in to arrest the culprits, and bottles flew in the direction of the trouble. Within minutes, a small-scale riot had erupted, and Detroit's riot-trained tactical mobile unit was brought in to disperse the crowd. Lawlessness spread back towards the bridge, and the crowd, whether peaceful or angry, sober or drunk, was forced onto Jefferson Avenue, where cars were overturned, windows smashed, and property vandalized. It took the police 2 hours to contain the disturbance, and journalists who had come to the Love-In, mostly to file soft lifestyle features on the hippie phenomenon, suddenly had front-page news. Riot at Love-In, 10 jailed. So much for the Love-In. I probably would have been there, too. Oh, Muhammad Ali was in Detroit in 1967. He fought an exhibition match, and really it was just days before Ali had to face the music about burning his draft card and refusing to go, and saying that he was a conscientious objector. I didn't pay any attention to none of that when I was a kid. My phone fell over. Here in this part of the book, they say that the offices of Motown were damaged when a tank round was fired during the riot. I tried to Google this and find out whether tanks had fired rounds during the riot. I don't think so. The closest I could come to that was a tank did fire off its .50 caliber machine gun. There was this big thing. Three black kids got killed at the Algiers motel. The Detroit police went there, and it sounds like they beat them, tortured them, and then decided to murder them. The cops ended up getting off because they weren't read their Miranda rights before they gave their statements. And it's just odd. The Miranda rights, I didn't know that there was a gentleman whose name was Miranda. That's where the Miranda rights come from. The cops hated the Miranda rights, but they used it, to get off. Many, many mistakes in this book. This guy's talking about the Rooster Tail, which is like a bar restaurant here in Detroit. I think it's still open. I've never been there. I'm pretty sure it's on the Detroit River. He says it's on Lake Detroit. There is no Lake Detroit. My note here says, this author, woo boy, the last sentence. The dramatics had been taken to the edges of tolerance and were then forced to walk barefoot through the night on a journey into the veritable heart of Detroit's darkness. What a sentence, the heart of Detroit's darkness. I mean, he's, I guess, referencing the book, The Heart of Darkness, which is an excellent book. I've read it. And Apocalypse Now is based on The Heart of Darkness. If you've never read The Heart of Darkness, get it. It's a very short. You can read it in like 2 days. And I've got to read this paragraph. This is about John Sinclair. Sinclair had a galvanizing effect on the fortunes of MC5. MC5 means Motor City 5. They were the ones who sang Kick Out the Jams, Motherfuckers. Uh, Great band. I have MC5 music. Taking them from the Detroit garage band subcultures to a place at the heart of alternative rock. Nobody said alternative rock at that time. Within a matter of a year, Kool aided by acid, they became one of the most talked about bands of the 60s, permanently screeching on the margins of the law. Everybody got high, so first off, you were on the other side of the police, Sinclair remembered. They didn't want you to get high. That was what really drew the line. That's what really politicized us. I think of politics as being involved in actions, involving groups of people, not just an outlook. If you have an outlook, you're a philosopher. If you're doing something about it, you're an activist. So we wanted to do something about it. The term I used was that we were LSD-driven total maniacs in the universe. We thought that should all be just blown to smithereens by LSD and electronic instruments. I don't know how to stress enough that we were on acid. We were fearfully lunatics. We just didn't give a fuck. I thought that was a great paragraph. 593-page book. This note is on page 410. There were times where I would go into my room and maybe just read 4 pages. That's all I could stand of Florence Ballard and her arguments with Barry Gordy and one of my last notes, probably my last note, says 18 pages to go and this motherfucker is introducing new characters. And he continued to introduce new characters all the way to the end. I don't recommend this book unless you're like a super fan of Motown music. And even if you are, I'm sure there's better books than this crap. My son bought me this book. He in school they had been studying the riot of 1967. And I'm sure that from the cover, my son saw this book and he said, my dad likes to read. He's going to love this book. It's that old saying, don't judge a book by its cover. This book is a perfect example of that saying. That is it. Thank you.